Renee Walsh stood in the doorway with her arms folded, blocking the only path out of the office. Daniel Hartley checked his watch. 4:45, 11 minutes to reach his car, beat the traffic on Lindell Avenue, and walk into the restaurant before Claire decided he wasn't coming. "I told you about this on Monday," Daniel said. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. "You approved it. I have somewhere to be." "Something came up," Renee said. "A client call. I need you on it." "What client?" She didn't answer right away. Around them, the office had gone unusually quiet. Keyboards stopped clicking. Priya Malhotra, 2 desks over, had gone very still, the way people do when they're listening hard but pretending not to. Daniel had worked under Renee for 3 years. In that time, he had learned to read the small shifts in her face, the way sailors read weather. Right now, her expression gave nothing away, and that worried him more than if she had simply yelled. "I have a date," he said, and the word landed strange in his own mouth, like a language he hadn't spoken in a long time. 3 years, to be exact. 3 years since the divorce papers, since the apartment that used to be a house, since the only thing waiting for him at home each night was an 8-year-old girl who deserved a father who still believed in something other than work. His sister-in-law Megan had set this up, a friend from her book club, Claire Bennett. They had talked on the phone twice and texted for 2 weeks, and somewhere in there Daniel had remembered what it felt like to be nervous about something good. "It can wait," Renee said. "It's a reservation, for 2 people, at 6. Then reschedule it." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly, more like the floor tilting half a degree. He had given 4 days' notice. He had cleared his calendar, lined up the babysitter, double-checked with Lily that she was fine with Sophie staying late. He had done everything right, and none of it seemed to matter to the woman standing in the doorway like a locked gate. "No," he said. The word came out simpler than he expected. Just 1 syllable, flat and final. Renee blinked. For 3 years, Daniel had never once told her no. He had stayed late on Fridays. He had answered emails on his daughter's birthday. He had skipped his own father's retirement dinner because a deadline moved up without warning, and he had told himself that was just what good employees did. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't going to be the version of himself that always said yes. "I have a daughter at home counting down the hours," he said. "I have a person waiting for me, who I actually want to meet. And I have an approved request sitting in your inbox with your own signature on it. So unless you can show me an actual client, an actual call, with an actual name attached to it, I'm leaving at 5. Behind him, someone's chair creaked. Nobody pretended to be working anymore. Priya had turned fully around now, watching with the kind of stillness people use when they don't want to miss a single second. Renee's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence stretched long enough that the air conditioning clicking on sounded loud. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in the small audience that had gathered without meaning to, the way people drift toward a window when they hear 2 cars collide outside. She looked back at Daniel, and for one strange moment, something flickered across her face that wasn't anger at all. It looked almost like fear. Then it was gone, replaced by nothing, by the careful blankness of someone who has just realized they have no good answer. She didn't move from the doorway. She didn't step aside. She just stood there, silent, while the second hand on the wall clock kept ticking, and Daniel Hartley stepped around her anyway and walked toward the elevator, his heart pounding louder than his footsteps, with no idea what would be waiting for him when he came back tomorrow. The elevator doors slid open. He stepped inside. He pressed the button for the lobby and turned around just in time to see Renee still standing in the doorway of the office, watching him, saying nothing at all as the doors closed between them. It hadn't always been like this. 3 years ago, Renee Walsh had hired Daniel straight out of a job that was slowly crushing him, a sales role with a company that treated its people like furniture. She had been sharp and funny in the interview, the kind of boss people said they were lucky to work for. For the first year, that had mostly been true. She gave him real projects. She fought for his raises. She remembered his daughter's name without being told twice. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. It happened slowly enough that Daniel never noticed the exact day it started, only that 1 year he was a valued employee, and the next he was something closer to a possession. Small things first. A meeting moved without warning because she wanted him in the room. A vacation request that got approved, then mysteriously delayed by paperwork that never quite cleared. A comment, half joking, about how he never seemed to bring anyone around, like his personal life was a topic open for discussion at her discretion. He had let it slide because the job paid well, because Lily needed stability, because confronting it felt like more trouble than it was worth. He told himself it was just how Renee managed people, intense, hands-on, nothing personal. Tonight had felt personal. The elevator reached the lobby. Daniel walked out into the evening air, the kind of early autumn evening where the sky still held a little gold in it, and pulled out his phone. A text from Claire was waiting. "Running on time? I already picked a table by the window. Don't make me eat the breadbasket alone." He smiled despite everything, his thumb moving fast over the screen. "On my way. Save me a piece." He started walking toward the parking garage, his mind still half back in that office, replaying the moment Renee's mouth had opened and closed with nothing in it. He didn't know yet that the silence in that doorway was about to become the loudest thing that had happened at that company in years. He didn't know that Priya, still sitting at her desk, had already opened the shared calendar to look at the mysterious client call that had appeared out of nowhere the day before, with no client name, no meeting link, and no record of ever being scheduled by anyone but Renee herself. All Daniel knew, walking across the parking garage with his car keys in his hand, was that for the first time in 3 years, he had said no to his boss, and the building hadn't fallen down around him. He didn't know yet how close it would come to falling down anyway. He got into his car, pulled out of the garage, and didn't look back at the office windows, where one light, on the 3rd floor, stayed on long after everyone else had gone home for the night. The trouble had actually started 4 days earlier, on a Monday morning that began like any other. Daniel had walked into Renee's office at 9:15 with a printed calendar invite in his hand, an old habit from a job before this one, where verbal approvals had a way of disappearing. He set the paper on her desk and waited while she scanned it. "Thursday at 6, she said. "What's the occasion?" "Personal," he said, which was true, and also the only word that felt safe to say out loud. Renee looked up at him for a beat longer than the question required. "You never take personal time." "I'm taking it now." She signed the form. He thanked her and left, and that should have been the end of it. For 3 days it was. On Wednesday afternoon, Priya had wandered past Daniel's desk and dropped her voice low, the way people do when they're about to say something they've been turning over in their head for a while. "Did you see the calendar?" she asked. "What about it?" "There's a new invite for Thursday. 4:45. It just appeared. No client name, no agenda. Just your name and Renee's, pulled straight from her admin login." Daniel had looked, and there it was, sitting on the shared calendar like a stone dropped into still water. Client sync, Hartley Walsh. No further details. He clicked into it twice, looking for an attached email thread, a meeting link, anything that would explain who this mysterious client was. There was nothing. The entry had been created less than an hour earlier. "Maybe it's real," he said, though he didn't quite believe it. Priya raised an eyebrow but didn't push. She had been at the company 2 years longer than Daniel, long enough to remember other people who had once tried to leave on time for things that mattered to them, and the strange, sudden obstacles that always seemed to appear in their way. She didn't say any of that out loud yet. She just filed it away, the same way she filed away most things about Renee Walsh, quietly, carefully, in case she ever needed it. Daniel had gone to Renee directly that same afternoon, the folder of marketing decks still under his arm. He kept his tone light, professional, the voice he used when he wanted to solve a problem without starting a fight. "I saw there's a call on the calendar Thursday at 4:45, he said. "I have somewhere to be at 6. Can someone else take it, or can we move it earlier?" "It's an important client," Renee said, not looking up from her screen. "It has to be you." "Which client?" "I'll send the details." She never did. He had let it go for one more day, telling himself it might genuinely resolve itself, that maybe there really was a client, that maybe Renee really would forward the invite with a name attached and this would turn out to be nothing. He had built a small, fragile hope around that possibility, the way people do when they want very badly to avoid a confrontation. By Thursday morning, no details had come. He checked again at lunch. Nothing. He sent Renee a short, polite message asking for the dial-in information so he could prepare. She replied 2 hours later with a single line. "We'll talk before then." That was the moment Daniel understood, with a kind of quiet, sinking certainty, that there was no client at all. He thought about canceling the date. He actually opened his messages and typed out an apology to Claire before deleting it, word by word. his thumb hovering over the screen. Then he thought about Lily, asleep down the hall most nights by the time he got home, and the long list of things he had quietly given up over 3 years, without ever deciding to give them up. He thought about how easy it would be to let this become one more thing on that list. He didn't send the cancellation. Instead, he packed his bag at 4:30, said a polite goodbye to Priya, who gave him a look that was somewhere between worry and quiet support, and walked toward Renee's office to remind her, one more time, that he had somewhere to be. That walk ended in the doorway, with her arms crossed and her voice telling him something had come up, and from there the story circled back to where it had already been told. A held breath, a flat no, a silence that filled the room like water rising in a tank, until it reached the very top and still didn't spill over. What happened after the elevator doors closed was something Daniel wouldn't learn the full shape of for another 2 days, but it started immediately, the second he was out of sight. Priya Malhotra didn't go back to her work right away. She sat at her desk for a full minute, staring at her monitor without seeing it, replaying the way Renee's mouth had opened and stayed empty. Then she did something she had thought about doing for a long time and never quite found the nerve to try. She opened the shared calendar's edit history. It was a feature most people in the office didn't know existed, buried 3 menus deep in the settings, something an old IT contractor had shown her once during a slow afternoon 2 years earlier, half as a joke, half as a warning. Every change to a calendar entry left a timestamp and a username behind it, quiet and permanent, like a fingerprint on glass. She typed in the date, Thursday. She found the entry, Client Sync, Hartley/Walsh. Created by R. Walsh, 3:58 p.m., Wednesday. No edits since. No client name added, ever. No outside email address attached to the invite, which every real client meeting always had. Just 2 internal names, sitting alone in a box that had been built, from the very beginning, to look official and mean nothing at all. Priya sat back in her chair, her stomach tight. She thought about 3 other names, 3 other people who had quietly left the company over the past 2 years, all citing reasons that never quite added up when you looked closely. A woman in accounts who had been denied a transfer twice before, finally taking a job somewhere else. A young man in operations whose promotion had been delayed for so long he stopped asking about it and started job hunting instead. A pattern, if you looked at it right, the way a series of dots becomes a shape once you stop staring at them one at a time. She didn't say anything to anyone that evening. She closed her laptop, gathered her things, and walked to her car with her phone in her hand, debating whether to text Daniel or wait until morning. In the end, she decided to wait, at least until his date was over. He deserved one evening that belonged only to him. Daniel had no idea any of this was happening as he pulled into the restaurant parking lot 8 minutes late, his tie slightly crooked, his mind still circling the silence in that doorway like a tongue returning to a sore tooth. He found Claire at a table by the window, exactly where she said she would be, with 2 glasses of water already poured and a small private smile on her face when she saw him walk in. "You look like a man who just had a day," she said. "You have no idea," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Try me." And for the next hour, sitting across from a woman whose laugh came easy and whose questions felt like genuine curiosity instead of small talk, Daniel Hartley managed, almost completely, to forget about the office. Almost. His phone buzzed once in his pocket around 7:30. He ignored it. It buzzed again 10 minutes later. He glanced down just long enough to see Priya's name on the screen, and a single line of preview text that made his stomach drop even before he opened it. "You need to see this. It's bigger than tonight." He set the phone face down on the table and looked back up at Claire, who was watching him with the kind of patience that didn't ask questions it wasn't owed answers to yet. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I think so," he said, and for the rest of the dinner he chose to believe it, even though some quiet part of him already knew the answer was waiting for him on a screen he hadn't looked at yet, and it wasn't going to be simple. The breadbasket, as promised, did not survive the appetizers. Claire had a way of talking that made silence feel optional rather than necessary, filling the space between courses with stories about her job at a small architecture firm, her terrible taste in reality television, the fact that she had once tried to teach herself to play violin using only internet videos, and gave up after the neighbors filed a noise complaint. "In my defense," she said, "the song was supposed to be a lullaby. It came out sounding like a smoke alarm having an emotional breakdown. Daniel laughed harder than the joke probably deserved, the kind of laugh that comes out of a person who hasn't had much reason to use it lately. Across the table, Claire watched him with an expression he couldn't quite name, something between amusement and genuine interest, like she was trying to figure out the shape of him one sentence at a time. "So," she said, breaking a piece of bread that no longer needed defending, since the basket was already half gone. "Megan told me you have a daughter." "Lily," he said. "She's 8. She picked out my shirt tonight, actually. Vetoed 2 others first. Smart kid. She has opinions. I like her already." There was an ease to the conversation that Daniel hadn't expected, not after 3 years of dates that existed only in theory, conversations he talked himself out of before they ever started. He found himself telling Claire about Lily's obsession with a cartoon about talking dinosaurs, about the small ritual they had of reading 2 chapters every night no matter how late he got home, about the way she had recently started asking, very seriously, whether he was lonely. "Are you?" Claire asked. "Lonely, I mean." It was a direct question, the kind most first dates carefully avoided, and Daniel respected her for asking it plainly, instead of fishing around the edges. "I was," he said. "For a while there it felt normal, like background noise you stop hearing. Tonight's the first time in a long time I noticed it was quiet." Claire smiled at that, soft and unguarded, and reached for her water glass instead of saying anything right away, which felt like its own kind of answer. Underneath the conversation, though, a second current was running, one Daniel kept trying to push down and couldn't quite manage. Every few minutes his mind drifted back to that doorway, to Renee's face going blank, to the strange flicker of something like fear that had crossed it right before the silence. He kept asking himself what exactly he had just done, whether he had simply asserted a boundary, or whether he had pulled a single loose thread on something much larger, something that had been quietly holding together for years, and was now starting, slowly, to come apart. His phone buzzed against the table, face down, twice in quick succession. He didn't look at it. He had decided, somewhere between the appetizer and the entree, that tonight belonged to Claire, and to Lily's approval of his shirt, and to nothing else. It buzzed a third time. Claire glanced at it, then back up at him, careful not to pry. "You can check it," she said. "I won't be offended. Single dad rules. The phone stays close." "It's not Lily," he said. "Sophie would have called if it was anything urgent." "Work?" He hesitated. "Something like that." Claire didn't push further, which he appreciated more than he could say. They moved on to dessert, splitting a slice of something chocolate that neither of them finished, talking about nothing important in the easy way people do when they've decided, somewhere along the way, that they'd like to do this again. By the time the check came, the restaurant had thinned out around them, the evening crowd replaced by a quieter, later one. Daniel walked Claire to her car, the autumn air sharp enough to make their breath visible, and stood there for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I'd like to see you again," he said, which felt simpler to say out loud than he had expected. "Good," Claire said, "because I already told Megan I would be very upset if you didn't ask." He laughed, and for a second the office, the calendar, the silence in the doorway, all of it receded to somewhere far away, a problem that belonged to tomorrow and not tonight. He waited until he was alone in his car, the engine running, the heater starting to push warm air through the vents, before he finally picked up his phone and opened Priya's messages. The first read, "You need to see this. It's bigger than tonight." The second, "I checked the calendar history. There was never a client. She created the invite herself, the day before, with nothing attached to it. No email thread, no agenda, nothing." The third, sent 20 minutes later, "There's more. I found 2 other people who left in the last 2 years, after something similar happened to them. I think this has happened before. I think it might keep happening if nobody says anything." Daniel sat in the parking lot for a long moment, the warmth of the dinner still sitting somewhere in his chest, slowly giving way to something colder and more unsettled. He thought about Renee's face in that doorway, the flicker of fear before the blankness settled over it. He thought about 3 years of small accommodations, vacation days delayed, meetings rescheduled around his life instead of the other way around, and how he had always assumed it was simply how she managed people. He typed back a single line. "Send me everything you have. I'll be in early tomorrow." Then he started the car and drove home, past the dark windows of houses where other families were already asleep, toward the babysitter waiting up for him, and the daughter who would ask, first thing in the morning, whether the date had gone well, and whether the lady liked dinosaurs too. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet that had settled over the office after he walked out that doorway wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something the whole company would be talking about by the end of the following week. Daniel got to the office at 7:15 the next morning, an hour before he normally arrived, with 2 coffees in hand, because he had a feeling Priya would already be there waiting, and he was right. She was sitting at her desk with her laptop open, and a manila folder beside it, the old-fashioned kind, thick with printed pages. When she saw him, she didn't smile the way she usually did. She just nodded toward the empty conference room at the end of the hall, the one with the door that actually closed all the way. They sat across from each other at the small round table, and Priya slid the folder toward him without a word. Daniel opened it and found exactly what her messages had promised. A printout of the calendar entry's edit history, time-stamped, with Renee's login attached and nothing else. Behind it, a second page, this one a spreadsheet Priya had built herself over the past several hours, listing names, dates, and short notes in a column on the right. Marisol Tate, accounts. Denied transfer request twice in 14 months. Cited family obligations conflicting with sudden schedule changes. Left for a competitor in March. Owen Brightman, operations. Promotion delayed 11 months past initial offer. Reported repeated last-minute meeting changes around personal commitments. Resigned in June. I talked to both of them last night, Priya said quietly. Marisol especially. She said almost the exact same thing happened to her. A meeting that appeared out of nowhere right when she had something important outside of work. No client name, no record. When she pushed back, Renee told her it would reflect badly on her commitment. Same words she used on you yesterday. Daniel set the page down slowly, his coffee going cold in his hand. Why didn't anyone say anything before now? Because each time it looked small enough to ignore, Priya said. One missed dinner, one delayed transfer. Easy to explain away as bad luck, or a demanding job, or just Renee being Renee. It only looks like a pattern if you put all the small things next to each other at once. Nobody had done that until last night. Daniel sat back in his chair, the weight of it settling over him slowly, the way cold water rises around your ankles before you realize how deep you've already walked in. 3 years of his life, examined now in a new light, 100 small moments rearranging themselves into a shape he hadn't let himself see before. What do we do with this? He asked. I think we take it to HR, Priya said, today, before she has time to build a story that explains all of it away. Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed on the table between them. A calendar notification, this one entirely real, sent from Renee's actual assistant, requesting his presence in her office at 8:30 sharp. He looked up at Priya. She already knows we're talking. Maybe, Priya said. Or maybe she just knows she has to deal with what happened yesterday somehow, and she's getting ahead of it before you do. Either way, Daniel had less than an hour to decide exactly how he was going to walk into that office, and what he was going to say when he got there. At 8:30, Daniel knocked once and stepped into Renee's office, the folder Priya had built sitting in his bag, untouched for now. He wanted to hear what she had to say first. Renee looked different than she had the day before. Less composed, though she was clearly working hard to hide it. There were 2 cups of coffee on her desk instead of the usual one, and a notepad covered in her own handwriting, crossed out and rewritten in several places, like she had been practicing what to say. Sit down, she said, and he did. About yesterday, she began, then stopped, restarted. I want to apologize for how that looked. The client situation resolved itself as it turns out. I should have communicated better. There was no client, Daniel said. The room went still in a way that mirrored the doorway from the night before, except this time it was just the 2 of them. No audience, no witnesses, nothing but the hum of the air conditioning and the weight of the sentence sitting between them. Excuse me? I had someone check the calendar history this morning, Daniel said, keeping his voice level, the way he had practiced in the car on the drive-in. The invite was created the day before, by you, with no client name, no agenda, no outside email thread. That's not how real client meetings get scheduled here, and you know it. Renee's hand tightened slightly around her coffee cup. I don't appreciate you going through my calendar. I didn't. Someone else did. after watching the same thing happen to me that apparently happened to at least 2 other people who don't work here anymore. For a long moment, Renee said nothing. Her eyes moved to the window, then back to him, and something in her expression shifted, the careful professional mask slipping just slightly to reveal something underneath it that looked almost like exhaustion. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "Then tell me what it is." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her phone and typed something quickly, and less than a minute later, there was a knock at the door. Grace Coleman from HR stepped inside, holding her own folder, her expression carefully neutral in the way HR professionals trained themselves to be. "Renee asked me to sit in," Grace said, taking the third chair at the small round table. "Daniel, I understand there may have been some confusion about yesterday's schedule." "There wasn't confusion," Daniel said. "There was a fabricated meeting designed to keep me from leaving for a personal commitment that had already been approved 4 days earlier, in writing, with her signature on it." He reached into his bag and set the printed approval form on the table, followed by the calendar history Priya had pulled that morning. Grace studied both pages carefully, her expression giving nothing away, though Daniel noticed the slight tightening around her eyes as she read the timestamp on the calendar entry. "This is the first I'm hearing of any of this," Grace said slowly. "It might not be the only instance," Daniel said, and he laid Priya's spreadsheet on the table next to the other 2 pages, the names of Marisol Tate and Owen Brightman sitting there in plain black ink. Grace looked at the names for a long moment, then up at Renee, whose face had gone very pale. "I'm going to need to speak with both of you separately," Grace said finally, "and I'm going to need to look into this more formally. This isn't something I can resolve in a single conversation." "Of course," Renee said quietly, her voice smaller than Daniel had ever heard it. "Daniel, can you give us a moment?" He nodded and stood, gathering nothing, since he had left every piece of evidence sitting on the table where it belonged. As he reached the door, Renee spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it. "I never meant for it to become this," she said. He turned back, his hand on the door handle. "Maybe not, but it did, and it's not just about me anymore." He stepped out into the hallway and closed the door gently behind him, leaving the 2 women alone in a room that suddenly felt much smaller than it had a moment before, while down the hall, the rest of the office tried, badly, to pretend they weren't watching the closed blinds for any sign of what was happening inside. The investigation, once it started, moved faster than Daniel expected, though it never felt fast while he was living through it. Over the following days, Grace Coleman scheduled a series of quiet conversations, pulling people one at a time into the same small conference room where Daniel had first laid out the evidence, asking careful, neutral questions that nobody felt entirely comfortable answering, and nobody felt entirely comfortable refusing either. Noah Whitfield was the first to speak with her after Daniel, and word filtered back through the office slowly, the way it always does, in fragments passed between desks during lunch breaks and quiet moments by the coffee machine. Noah had apparently described 2 separate occasions over the past year where his own scheduled time off had been quietly chipped away at, never canceled outright, just steadily eroded by urgent tasks that always seemed to appear right before he was set to leave. "She never said no," Noah told Priya, who relayed it to Daniel later that week. "She just made it impossible to say yes to anything else. There's a difference, but it adds up to the same thing." Marisol Tate, reached by phone since she no longer worked at the company, gave a similar account to Grace directly, this time on the record, describing in detail the transfer request that had been delayed not once but twice, each time with a reason that sounded reasonable in isolation, and deeply troubling once you set it beside the others. Owen Brightman was harder to reach at first, having moved out of state for his new job, but when Grace finally got him on a call, he didn't hesitate. He described his own promotion, promised verbally, and then quietly delayed for nearly a year, always with some new urgent project requiring his attention, right at the moment he might have pushed harder for it. What emerged, piece by piece, wasn't a single dramatic incident, but a slow, patient pattern, stretched out over years, each individual moment small enough to excuse on its own, all of them together forming something much harder to explain away. Grace began to understand, the deeper she dug, that Renee Walsh hadn't been managing a team so much as quietly tightening her grip around the people she depended on most, the ones whose absence, even for an evening, seemed to unsettle her more than the situation could reasonably explain. It was Priya, in a quieter conversation with Grace toward the end of that first week, who offered the piece of context that finally made sense of the rest. "I've been here 4 years," Priya said. "I remember when Renee's mother passed away, maybe 2 years back. She didn't take more than 3 days off. Came back to work looking like she hadn't slept, and from what I could tell, things got tighter after that. More last-minute meetings. More resistance whenever anyone tried to take time for themselves. I don't think it's an excuse. I just think something changed in her around then, and instead of dealing with it, she started making sure nobody around her could leave either." Grace wrote that down carefully, without comment, the kind of detail that wouldn't excuse what had happened but might, eventually, help explain it. Daniel heard about that conversation secondhand, and it complicated things in a way he hadn't expected. He had spent the past week building a clear, simple picture in his mind, a controlling boss who had finally been caught, a problem with an obvious solution. The idea that there might be a sadder, more human story underneath it didn't erase what she had done, but it made the whole situation harder to hold on to with a clean, righteous anger. It felt, instead, like something heavier and more complicated, the kind of truth that didn't resolve neatly no matter how long you turned it over. In the middle of all this, life kept moving forward in the way it stubbornly does, refusing to pause for anyone's convenience. Daniel and Claire saw each other again that Saturday, this time for a long walk through the park near her apartment instead of a formal dinner, the two of them talking easily about nothing important, while the late afternoon light slanted gold through the trees. "You've been somewhere else half this conversation," Claire said eventually, not unkindly. "Work? It's complicated," he said. "Want to talk about it? Or want to talk about literally anything else?" He thought about it for a moment, and then, surprising himself, he told her the broad strokes of it, careful not to share more than felt appropriate, but enough that she understood why his mind kept drifting. Claire listened without interrupting, the same patient attention she had shown at dinner, and when he finished, she didn't offer easy advice or rush to fix it for him. "Sounds like you did the hard thing," she said simply. "That's usually the right one, even when it doesn't feel finished yet." The following weekend, Claire met Lily for the first time, a carefully low-pressure afternoon at a small ice cream shop near Daniel's apartment, the kind of meeting he had thought carefully about, not wanting to move too fast, but also not wanting to hide an important part of his life from his daughter forever. Lily, true to form, had opinions within the first 5 minutes, mostly about which ice cream flavor was objectively the best, and by the time they left, she had decided, with the absolute confidence only an 8-year-old can manage, that Claire was, in her words, pretty cool actually. "She likes dinosaurs," Lily reported to Daniel later that night, as if this single fact settled the matter permanently. "She knows the names of 3 kinds. I tested her." "Did she pass?" "Barely," Lily said, with the air of someone delivering a generous verdict. Back at the office, the investigation reached its final stretch by the end of the second week. Grace called Daniel into her own office on a Thursday morning, almost exactly 7 days after the night that had started all of it, and told him, in careful, measured language, that the company had reached a decision and wanted him present for the final conversation, scheduled for that afternoon. "You don't have to come," Grace said, "but given everything you brought forward, I thought you should have the option." Daniel sat with that for a moment, thinking about the doorway, the silence, the flicker of fear on Renee's face, that he hadn't understood until much later. He thought about Marisol and Owen and Noah, about the small accumulated weight of years nobody had ever added up until now. "I'll be there," he said. That afternoon, the same conference room that had hosted every difficult conversation of the past 2 weeks filled up one final time, this time with more people than usual. Grace sat at the head of the table with a senior director Daniel had only met twice before. Renee sat across from them, her hands folded carefully in front of her, the posture of someone trying very hard to hold something steady. Daniel sat near the door, close enough to hear everything, far enough to feel like an observer rather than a participant in whatever was about to happen. "We've completed our review," Grace began, her voice even and professional. "Based on the evidence gathered, including calendar records, employee testimony, and a documented pattern spanning more than 2 years, the company has decided to remove Renee from any scheduling or approval authority over personal time and transfer requests, effective immediately. This decision will be reviewed again in 6 months." Renee nodded once, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere on the table in front of her. "Additionally," Grace continued, A formal written warning will be placed in her file, and she will be required to complete management training focused on appropriate boundaries and delegation. The senior director added a few more details, procedural language about reporting structures and who would handle scheduling approvals going forward, but Daniel found himself only half listening, his attention caught instead on Renee's face, which had settled into an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not anger, not the careful blankness from the doorway, something closer to relief, strange as that seemed, as if some weight she had been carrying so long she'd forgotten its shape had finally, partially, been set down. When the meeting ended, people filed out one by one, the senior director first, then Grace, who paused at the door to give Daniel a small nod that felt like both a thank you and a quiet acknowledgement of how hard the past 2 weeks had been. Eventually, it was just Daniel and Renee left at the table, the late afternoon light coming through the blinds in thin gold stripes across the surface between them. "I owe you an apology," Renee said finally. "A real one. Not the kind I gave you in this room the first time." "Okay," Daniel said, not unkindly, but not quite ready to make it easy for her either. "I don't have a good explanation," she continued. "I could tell you it started after my mother died, and that would be true, but it wouldn't make any of it right. I think somewhere along the way I started needing people to need this job as much as I did, because it was the only thing that hadn't left me yet. That's not your problem to carry. It was never fair of me to make it your problem." Daniel sat with that for a long moment, turning it over the way he had been turning over everything for the past 2 weeks, looking for the place where anger and understanding could sit next to each other without canceling each other out. "I appreciate you saying that," he said eventually. "I'm not going to pretend the last 2 weeks didn't happen, or that I'm not still figuring out what I think about all of it, but I hope you actually use whatever comes next to change something, not just for me, but for whoever ends up working for you after this." "I'm going to try," Renee said quietly. "I don't know if that's worth much right now, but I'm going to try." Daniel nodded and stood, gathering his things from the table for what felt like the final time in that particular room. He didn't have a neat, satisfying response ready, the kind that would have tied the whole situation into a clean bow. Some things, he was learning, didn't resolve that way. They just shifted, slowly, into something a little better than before, and you carried the rest forward as best you could. 3 months later, on a Thursday evening in early winter, Daniel left the office at 5 o'clock exactly, the way he had every Thursday since the investigation closed, with nobody blocking the doorway and no mysterious meeting appearing on the calendar at the last possible minute. Noah had taken over scheduling for personal time requests, a small, sensible system that simply respected what people had already asked for, without drama, without delay. Renee was still at the company, working under closer oversight now, in a role with less authority over other people's calendars, and more direct accountability to the senior director who had sat in on that final meeting. She and Daniel had settled into something quieter than friendship but more than mere coexistence, a careful, professional respect built slowly out of the wreckage of what had come before. She had, true to her word, completed the management training, and more than once Daniel had noticed her catch herself mid-sentence when an old habit threatened to resurface, correcting course before it became a problem again. Priya had been promoted that same winter, a recognition, everyone understood without anyone saying it directly, of the quiet courage it had taken to pull that calendar history in the first place, and follow it all the way through to the end. Daniel drove home that Thursday evening with the radio playing low, the streets dusted with the season's first thin layer of snow, and pulled into his driveway to find the porch light already on, and Lily's silhouette pressed against the front window, waiting for him the way she always did, though tonight there was a second silhouette beside her, smaller and unfamiliar, that resolved itself as he got closer into Claire, who had apparently arrived early and gotten roped into a dinosaur quiz that, judging by her expression through the glass, she was very much losing. He let himself in, shrugging off his coat in the small entryway, while Lily ran over to deliver the verdict. "She knows 6 now," Lily announced, holding up 6 fingers as proof. "I'm teaching her a new one every week." "High standards," Daniel said. "Very high," Claire agreed from the couch, looking entirely unbothered by the challenge ahead of her. Later that night, after Lily had been read her 2 chapters and tucked in with the particular seriousness she brought to bedtime negotiations, Daniel sat on the back steps with Claire, the cold sharp and clean, in a way that felt more like relief than discomfort. Neither of them said much for a while, content with the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. You seem lighter than you did a few months ago, Claire said eventually. I feel lighter, Daniel admitted. I spent 3 years thinking the job had to come first, that everything else could wait until things calmed down. I'm not sure things ever actually calm down. You just have to decide, at some point, what you're not willing to give up anymore. And what's that? He thought about the doorway, the silence, the long 2 weeks that followed, the strange, complicated relief on Renee's face in that final meeting. He thought about Lily's 2 chapters every night, about Claire learning dinosaur names she would never need for any practical reason, except that an 8-year-old asked her to. This, he said simply, gesturing at nothing in particular, and everything at once. Just this. Claire didn't say anything clever back. She just leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat there together in the cold, quiet evening, while behind them, through the window, the porch light stayed warm and steady, the way it had on 100 ordinary nights before, and would, Daniel hoped, on 100 more still to come.